On March 6, 2026, a film appeared on the Netflix platform that millions of viewers queued up to watch without even reading the description. One name was enough for them. The man who became an icon of a new generation of action cinema after his role as Jack Reacher is back in military gear. Back in a situation where survival depends on the speed of thought and willpower, and once again, without compromise. War Machine. That is the title of this film. And no, it is not a story from the Marvel Universe, not a sequel to something we've already seen. It is an original picture directed by Australian filmmaker Patrick Hughes, with a script written by Hughes himself alongside James Beaufort. It is a mature, gritty, R-rated sci-fi action movie that blends military drama with the theme of an alien invasion in a way rarely done in modern cinema. But let's start not with the trailer or the release date. Let's start with a question that, if you think about it, explains everything. What happens when a professional military man, someone who has been through dozens of battles, lost people next to him, and survived what most of us cannot even imagine, faces an enemy against whom all his experience proves useless? What does a soldier do when the rules of war he knew by heart suddenly stop working? This is exactly what War Machine is about. And this is exactly why it hooks you much deeper than it seems at first glance. The protagonist goes by the designation Soldier 81. He is played by Alan Ritchson. There is something important in this very name. In the military world, numerical designations instead of names are not just for convenience. It is psychology. A soldier who has a number instead of a name is a function, a tool, a mechanism. The first half of the film methodically destroys this image, showing that behind this function is a living person with pain, with a history, and with losses that he carries within himself every day. The action begins in Afghanistan, a familiar landscape for war cinema, but director Patrick Hughes uses it as a springboard, not just a backdrop. A military operation, a squad of soldiers, a target, a mission, all of this is familiar and understandable to the viewer. And then the sky changes. What crashes down to earth is nothing humanity has ever encountered. Stop. Let's pause for a second right here. The film is crafted so that this moment, the transition from realistic war cinema to sci-fi, does not feel like a jarring disconnect. Hughes and Beaufort spent a significant part of the screenwriting process specifically ensuring that the first act built enough human grounding and enough emotional connection with the characters before the genre shift occurs. Judging by the reaction of most viewers, they succeeded. Alongside Ritchson, Dennis Quaid appears on screen, a legend of American cinema whose career spans dozens of significant roles. In War Machine, he plays a military commander, and his presence lends the picture a special authority. He is not just another face in the frame. Quaid knows how to make even small scenes weighty and filled with history. And it is especially noticeable here Stephan James, whom international audiences know from the series Homecoming, plays one of the key members of the squad. His character acts as an emotional counterweight to Ritchson, a voice of humanity in a situation where humanity seems like an unaffordable luxury. James has always been adept at playing internal struggles, and this talent is fully utilized here. Jai Courtney, well known to viewers from the Terminator franchise, Esai Morales, Kiernan Lonsdale, and Daniel Webber round out the ensemble. Each of them adds their own storyline and their own perspective on what is happening to the narrative. This is not a random collection of faces. Hughes thought deeply about the acting balance, about how different temperaments and acting schools interact within a single screen space. The result feels exactly like a team, not a group of famous names gathered in one frame. Now for the numbers, which say a lot about this film. In the Australian box office, where the picture was released on February 12, 2026, War Machine grossed only $57,000. That is very low. For comparison, a successful Australian theatrical run for a major film can bring in millions. What does this mean? Perhaps the marketing for traditional theatrical release was minimal. Perhaps the studio was betting on streaming from the start. Or perhaps the audience for this film simply lives on Netflix, not in movie theaters. When the film appeared on the platform on March 6th, this became obvious. In its very first days, War Machine took the position of the second biggest debut of the year on Netflix. That is a serious milestone. The platform does not always publish exact viewership data, but its place in the rankings alone indicates that millions of people actively chose this film right out of the gate. Critics gave the picture a modest reception. On Rotten Tomatoes, it holds a 69% rating from professional critics and a 66% from audiences. On Metacritic, War Machine scored a 54 out of 100. This speaks to mixed impressions among professionals. Some praised the solid craftsmanship, convincing action scenes, and Ritchson in superb form. Others felt that the script didn't fully utilize the potential of its concept. But here is what matters. Viewers and critics diverged very little here. 69 against 66. This means that War Machine is perceived almost identically regardless of one's level of cinematic background. A solid, entertaining action movie that does exactly what it promises. Though this is exactly where I want to slow you down for a moment. Because beneath the surface of this film lies something more complex than it seems at first glance. The themes Hughes embedded into this project questions about the nature of war, what it means to be a soldier in a situation of total uncertainty. The limits of physical and psychological survival are all present in the picture. They just aren't on the surface. We will discuss this separately, and then you might reconsider your initial assessment of this film. The film has a runtime of 106 minutes. That's an hour and 46 minutes. The sound is mixed in Dolby Atmos, which gives the picture's soundscape a special volume. The aspect ratio is 2.39 to 1, a classic widescreen cinematic look that breathes with space and scale. These were intentional decisions. Hughes wanted this film to feel like real, big-screen cinema. Even if most people are watching it from their couch. The film was produced by Hidden Pictures and Huge Film. Distribution was initially handled by but the rights eventually passed to Netflix. This change became one of the key turning points in the project's life, because Netflix is exactly what gave the picture access to the audience that ultimately became its true viewership. The cinematographer is Aaron Morton, a New Zealand specialist with rich experience in genre cinema. The score was composed by Dimitri Gal. Both brought something crucial to War Machine, and we will cover their work in detail in the corresponding sections of this breakdown. But here is what you definitely don't expect to hear during production. The film came close to never being released at all a few times. There were moments when everything literally hung by a thread, and only a convergence of several factors allowed this project to reach the screen. What those moments were and who played a key role in saving it, we will tell that. Story in detail. There are directors who are born in the right place at the right time. Patrick Hughes is not one of them. He is the kind of director who carved out his own place from scratch. On the other side of the world from Hollywood, in a country where cinema exists. But big studio films are imported from America and then leave right back. Australia has given the world many great directors: Peter Weir, George Miller, Baz Luhrmann. Hughes is forging his own path in this lineup, and War Machine has become his most personal project to date. Patrick Hughes was born and raised in Australia. From an early age, cinema held a special place in his life, but the path to professional directing was not a straight line. He studied, shot short films, experimented with different formats, and searched for his voice. This search took years, but it shaped a director who knows how to work with limited resources while delivering a result that looks expensive and convincing. His first feature film, Red Hill, was released in 2010. It was an Australian neo-noir western shot on a very modest budget. A young constable arrives in a small mountain town and faces a bloody vengeance from the past. Hughes wrote the script, produced, and practically shot the picture alone. The film received rave reviews at international film festivals, and immediately caught the attention of Hollywood producers, and this is where the most fascinating part of his biography begins, when success comes to a director after a debut film. There are two paths. First, stay in auteur cinema, work slowly, meticulously, with complete control over every frame. Second, step into the world of big commercial cinema, accept its rules, its pace, its compromises, but gain a scale in return that is otherwise simply unattainable. Hughes chose the second path, and this choice turned into one of the most incredible career leaps in the history of Australian cinema. In 2014, Patrick Hughes received an offer that most directors of his level would have declined, deeming it too risky. He was offered to direct The Expendables 3, the third installment of Sylvester Stallone's franchise, an ensemble action blockbuster with a $100 million budget and a cast that included Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mel Gibson, Harrison Ford, Antonio Banderas, Wesley Snipes, and dozens of other genre legends. An Australian director with one film in his portfolio was handed the keys to this machine. It was either a crazy risk or a genius decision by the casting director. It turned out to be the latter. Filming for The Expendables 3 took place in Bulgaria and France. Hughes delivered. The film hit theaters, grossed over $200 million worldwide, and, more importantly, did not disappoint the audience who came for that specific spectacle. It was a trial by fire that Hughes passed without casualties, and Hollywood noticed his next major project was the Hitman's Bodyguard in 2017, starring Ryan Reynolds and Samuel L. Jackson, a fast-paced action comedy with sharp dialogue and a series of chase sequences that rank among the decade's best examples in the genre. The budget was $30 million. Global box office exceeded $176 million. That is not just success. It's proof that Hughes knows how to make cinema that simultaneously makes you laugh and keeps you on the edge of your seat. The sequel, Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard, came out in 2021. Salma Hayek was added to the familiar duo, and Hughes once again maintained the same energy, pace, and balance between humor and action. The picture grossed less than the first part, but cemented the director's status as a reliable author of commercial genre cinema. This is exactly where the story leading to War Machine begins. After two movies about the Bodyguard, Hughes found himself at a crossroads. He could continue working within proven formulas, directing sequels, accepting offers that guaranteed commercial safety. But inside him, by his own admission, an idea had long been sitting that demanded a completely different approach. No comedic tone, no irony, a serious conversation about war, about military men, about what happens to a person when they encounter something for which they have neither tools nor categories. Development of War Machine officially began in November 2021. Hughes sat down to write the script alongside James Beaufort, and this process took several years. Not because the work was slow, but because both authors treated it with extreme seriousness. They needed to create a story that was honest to the military experience while also functioning as a genre film. It is a very difficult balance to strike, and few manage it icily. Hughes did his research. He studied the structure of U.S. Army Special Forces, specifically the 75th Ranger Regiment, which became the prototype for the group in the film. He consulted with people who had been through real combat operations, read veterans' memoirs, watched documentaries. All of this was done not just to make the film look technically realistic, though that mattered too. The main goal was to understand the psychology, how a professional soldier thinks, what they feel when a situation escalates beyond everything they were trained for. One detail that few people know during the script's development: Hughes and Beaufort completely rewrote key scenes several times, not because of studio pressure, but out of their own dissatisfaction. There was a version where the alien threat appeared much earlier, almost at the very beginning of the film. But then the story lost what both authors considered most important: the time needed for the viewer to grow to love these people, to understand them, before everything starts to fall apart. This directorial decision to prioritize the human element over spectacle defines the entire tone of War Machine, and it comes directly from Hughes. From his understanding of how emotional viewer engagement works. When filming finally began in September 2024, Hughes returned to Australia. After years of working in Europe and North America, he was shooting at home, in the state of Victoria and in Queenstown, New Zealand. This wasn't just a logistical choice. For a director whose career started with the Australian landscapes of Red Hill, returning to native terrain carried personal meaning. Aaron Morton's camera captured something raw and genuine in these places that would have been impossible on studio lots in Los Angeles or Atlanta. The production period took exactly 3 months. Wrapping up on December 14, 2024, 3 months for a film of this caliber is a very tight schedule. Hughes is known for his ability to work fast without losing quality. He honed this skill from his very first professional shoots, and now it has become one of his primary professional advantages. War Machine as a directorial project is important for one more reason. It is the first film where Hughes didn't just direct someone else's script, but wrote the story himself from the ground up. The Expendables belonged to someone else's universe. The Bodyguard movies were someone else's characters. Here, everything from the concept to the final cut went through his vision, and you can feel it in every scene. Every movie you see on screen is the result of a long, often agonizing journey. Behind 2 hours of finished cinema lie years of negotiations, doubts, rewritten scripts, studio changes, lost funding, and unexpected rescues. War Machine is no exception. If anything, its development history is a particularly telling example of just how fragile the path from idea to release can be. It all started in November 2021. That was when Patrick Hughes officially recorded his intent to develop the project that eventually became War Machine. But the idea had existed earlier. Hughes had been incubating it during the production of the second Bodyguard film. When he found time to think about his next step, what his next film should be as an auteur, not just an executor, the core question went something like this. What happens if you throw a professional military man, completely shaped by the system, trained for one type of war, into a situation for which no training system in the world exists? This isn't just a plot hook. It's a philosophical question about the nature of competence, the limits of human experience, and what remains of a professional when their profession ceases to apply. Hughes approached James Beaufort with an offer to co-write the script. This was a calculated decision. Beaufort brought a different perspective, a different angle, and it was this collaboration that allowed the story to avoid becoming one-sided. The two voices in the script are audible, especially in moments when different characters debate the meaning of what is happening around them. The screenwriting took years, and that is no accident. Hughes insisted that the military aspect of the story be authentic, not just visually, but psychologically. He researched the structure of the U.S. Army's 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the most elite special operations forces, which served as a direct inspiration for the squad in the movie. The selection procedures for this regiment, known as RASP Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, involve an inhuman level of physical and psychological stress. Only a fraction of those who attempt it make it through. And it is this very system that shaped the protagonist's character. Parallel to the research, funding negotiations were underway. This is where the most difficult part of the development story begins. A major studio film, especially an original one, meaning it isn't based on an existing franchise or book, is always a tough sell. Studios love familiar names, proven brands, and guaranteed returns on investment. An original sci-fi action movie about soldiers encountering aliens with no recognizable source material is a risk. A high risk. Hidden Pictures and the production company Huge Film took on the project. But the path to financing was not straightforward. Several times it seemed the project would either face massive budget cuts or be shelved indefinitely. This is not uncommon in Hollywood. Countless films we will never know about died precisely at this stage. War Machine survived. Initially, Lionsgate handled distribution. It is a significant name in the industry, a studio with a rich history in genre cinema. It seemed like a safe harbor for Hughes's project. But at some point, the distribution rights shifted to Netflix. This decision, which at first glance might have seemed like a retreater step back from traditional theatrical release, actually turned out to be strategically flawless. Why Netflix? The answer lies in understanding the true audience for this film. War Machine is not a movie for the casual theatergoer choosing a picture from a poster in a mall lobby. It is a movie for the person who already knows they want to watch this exact genre. For the Alan Ritchson fan from the Reacher series. For the military sci-fi enthusiast. For the viewer who grew up on movies like Predator and G.I. Jane and wants something similar executed with modern sensibilities. That viewer sits on a streaming service, not in a movie theater. Netflix also gave the project something a traditional theatrical run couldn't: global, simultaneous presence. When War Machine hit the platform on March 6, 2026, viewers in dozens of countries saw it at the exact same time. Not staggered, not delayed by weeks, but all at once. This created a wave effect, where the conversation about the film started globally in unison. Now, regarding the production period, Pre-production took several months before principal photography began. The production team worked in Australia, which was a fundamental decision by Hughes. Not because Australia is cheaper, although that matters too, but because the specific landscapes of Victoria and Queenstown, New Zealand, provided exactly the visual environment the story demanded. Victoria offered some of the sets, mimicking the Afghan terrain, arid hills, rocky valleys, open spaces where a person feels small and vulnerable. Queenstown added mountainous landscapes with a distinct atmosphere impossible to recreate on a green screen stage. Nature, alive and unpredictable, became a full-fledged participant in the narrative. Principal photography kicked off on September 16, 2024, and wrapped on December 14th of the same year. Exactly 3 months. For a film with this much action, practical on-set special effects, and an ensemble cast, that is a highly compressed schedule. Hughes literally had no room for major delays. Post-production began right after filming wrapped, editing, VFX, sound mixing. This is the stage where the film takes its final shape, and it's often where the most critical decisions are made. Several scenes that were shot didn't make the final cut. Hughes made structural narrative choices that he himself described as painful but necessary. Every deleted scene represents time and money thrown in the trash. But it also proves that the director prioritizes the story's pacing and integrity over the desire to show off everything that was filmed. The Australian theatrical run, which began on February 12, 2026, was essentially a limited release, a test balloon. The numbers were modest. $57,000 at the Australian box office is the bottom threshold for a movie of this tier. But the studio wasn't trying to conquer theatrical box offices. The goal was different. To give the film a theatrical release, which in some countries is a prerequisite for entering award races, and then place the main bet on Netflix. The bet paid off. Becoming the second biggest debut of the year on the platform is not just a line in a press release. It is the result of a correctly built strategy, perfect timing, and properly understanding the audience, the development history of war. Machine reveals something important about the modern film industry. Original auteur cinema, even when operating within a genre, finds its way to the audience differently today than it did 20 years ago. Not through multiplexes, but through recommendation algorithms. Not through billboards, but through YouTube trailers and social media discussions. Hughes understood this earlier than many of his peers. Casting is the moment when a film ceases to be text on paper and becomes a living organism. It is here that a director makes choices that cannot be undone once the cameras roll. The wrong actor in the right role can destroy years of screenwriting work. The right actor in the right role can elevate the story to a level the writer never even anticipated. Patrick Hughes understood this perfectly, so he approached the casting of War Machine with the same meticulousness as he did the script. The central question was obvious: who would play Soldier 81? This character required a very rare combination of traits: the physical presence of a true military professional, the ability to convey internal pain without words through a gaze, a movement through silence, the ability to keep the audience tense for nearly 2 hours when, for much of the screen time, there isn't an actor of comparable magnitude next to him. And above all, the ability to make the viewer see the man behind the call sign, not just a function when Alan Ritchson's name came up in conversation. It was immediately clear. It was him by this time. Ritchson had walked a path that made him one of the most recognizable faces in genre cinema. The role of Jack Reacher in Amazon Prime Video's Reacher which debuted in February 2022 and instantly became one of the platform's most watched projects ever, turned him into a top-tier star in exactly the demographic War Machine needed. Fans of military thrillers and action movies knew Ritchson trusted him and showed up for him, but Hughes didn't choose him just for that. Ritchson knows how to stay silent in a way that is more eloquent than any monologue. There is something of old-school Hollywood action in him, shades of Steve McQueen or a young Clint Eastwood. A minimalism backed by immense internal work. When the director first met with the actor to discuss the role, the conversation immediately moved past technicalities. They talked about people who serve, about what that service does to a person, about the price a soldier pays, not just with their body, but with their soul. Ritchson listened, asked questions, returned to them again. Hughes realized he was looking at an actor who wouldn't just play the role, but would live it. The next crucial decision was bringing in Dennis Quaid. Quaid was well into his 70s during filming, and he remains one of the few actors of his generation still working in genre cinema with total dedication. With films like Enemy of the State, The Day After Tomorrow, Traffic and dozens of others under his belt, his appearance in War Machine as the military commander is not just a cameo for the sake of a name in the credits. He is an actor who understands the military theme from the inside and knows how to project commanding authority without a single false note. For Hughes, Quaid served another vital function. He acted as a human anchor the moment the film's reality began shifting toward the sci-fi. As long as a face carrying that level of trust and recognition is on screen, the audience remains grounded in the story, even when it steps outside of reality. Stephan James, as one of the squad's key members, was perhaps the most unexpected choice for some. James is widely known for his dramatic work, the series Homecoming, where he played a war veteran transitioning back to civilian life, and The Film Race, playing legendary track star Jesse Owens, belonged to a different register. Thoughtful, slow-paced, nuanced. This contrast is exactly what drew Hughes to him. James brought something to War Machine that wouldn't be there without him. The voice asking questions, a presence reminding the other characters and the audience that behind every weapon is a human being with thoughts, doubts, and the right to fear. In a world where everyone projects professional stoicism, James's character is the mirror reflecting the true cost of what is unfolding. Jai Courtney brought a completely different energy to the ensemble. Australian-born Courtney is known for Terminator Genisys, the Suicide Squad franchise, and the Divergent series. He specializes in characters where physical power walks hand in hand with unpredictability. In War Machine, his hero is a fighter who trusts his instincts more than his orders. This creates a constant internal tension within the group that the director utilizes expertly. Interestingly, both Courtney and Hughes are Australians. This wasn't just a biographical coincidence. They shared a cultural context, a mutual understanding of humor, rhythm, and how Australian actors operate within American genre cinema. This connection was palpable on set and ultimately reflected in the dynamic of their shared scenes. Isai Morales, an American TV and film veteran with experience dating back to working with Luis Valdez on La Bamba in 1987, joined the War Machine cast as someone capable of adding strategic depth. His character is a commander with a different view of the situation, someone whose role in the story only becomes clear gradually, through details and undertones. Kiernan Lonsdale, a young Australian actor known for playing Wally West in The Flash and his music career, brought youth and vulnerability to the film. His presence in the group adds an extra emotional layer. When the youngest and arguably least experienced team member faces what unfolds, his reaction often serves as a barometer for the audience's perception. Daniel Webber, recognized internationally for his role as Lee Harvey Oswald in the series 11.22, 63, and for his work in The Dirt, completes the core cast lineup. His character carries a backstory that unfolds not on the surface, but in the pauses, in his reactions, in how he watches the chaos around him. It is important to understand that this is not a random collection of star names. Hughes built the ensemble like an instrument, where every participant serves a function not just narratively, but emotionally. You have strength, doubt, authority, youth, experience, and vulnerability. All these traits exist in real military units, and their presence on screen makes the group convincing precisely as a group. The pre-production rehearsal process was structured so that the actors spent time together off-camera. This is standard practice for ensemble war films, tracing its roots back to Stephan. Spielberg's approach on Saving Private Ryan, when people on screen look like a team that has known each other for years. It's always the result of work done before filming begins. There are actors who become stars overnight. One role, one season, one moment, and suddenly the whole world knows their name. Alan Ritchson is not one of them. His journey to the status he holds in Hollywood today took nearly 20 years. 20 years of labor, roles of varying scale, highs and stretches where it felt like major success was passing him by. That is why his current standing in the industry feels earned in a way that is rarely seen. Alan Ritchson was born on November 28, 1984, in North Dakota, USA, and grew up in small towns in Florida. From childhood, he was involved in music. He sang and played multiple instruments. It was music, not acting, that initially seemed to be his main calling. He participated in singing competitions, auditioned for music programs, and sought a path in a world where voice mattered more than looks. But nature had other plans. Ritchson grew into a man with physical attributes worth their weight in gold in Hollywood. Standing nearly 6'3", 192 centimeters, with a physique most people can't achieve even after years in the gym, yet possessing a face that projects not just raw power, but humanity. That is a rare combination. His first major screen appearance was as Arthur Curry, the future Aquaman on the series Smallville, debuting in its 5th season in 2005. It was a TV project about a young Clark Kent, and Ritchson's role was recurring, not central. Nevertheless, it proved that this actor had more to offer than just an imposing physique. He could be light, charismatic, and knew how to land a joke without losing credibility. Years of varied work followed. Roles in films and series of different tiers. Blood Drive, Blue Mountain State, where he played a crude college football player, earning a devoted younger following. The role of Raphael in Michael Bay's 2 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies in 2014 and 2016. This was a significant milestone in his career, his first experience working on a truly massive studio blockbuster, even if the character existed mostly through CGI. But the real turning point happened in February 2022, when Amazon Prime Video launched based on Lee Child's book series about a former military policeman. No one expected such a massive result. The first season instantly became one of the most watched projects in the platform's history. Ritchson in the lead role wasn't just convincing, he was perfect. Book readers who had spent years arguing that Tom Cruise was the wrong choice for the previous adaptation unanimously agreed that Ritchson was exactly the Reacher that child had written. What makes his performance so accurate? There are a few components. First, physical accuracy. In the books, Reacher is described as a man of exceptional physical scale, and Ritchson finally embodied this literally, not abstractly. Second, the character's intellect. The literary Reacher isn't just a brawler. He is an analyst, someone who solves problems through observation and logic, not just muscle. Ritchson knows how to show gears turning in his head, distinguishing him from most purely physical actors. Third, and perhaps most importantly, he carries loneliness. Reacher is a drifter, a man without a home or attachments, harboring something that prevents him from settling down. Ritchson conveys this not with text, but through presence. There is something in how he holds a pause, how he stares at the horizon, how he stays silent, that tells the audience everything they need to know without a single word. It is precisely this quality, ability to speak through silence, that became central to the role of Soldier 81 in War Machine. To prepare for the role, Ritchson worked with military consultants, studying the movement and tactics of special forces units. This wasn't his first time doing so. For Reacher, he also underwent intense preparation, studying combat techniques and working with real military professionals. But for War Machine, the scale of preparation was different because the nature of the role was different. Soldier 81 is not just a fighter. He is a man carrying the weight of loss. In his past is a tragedy that dictates every decision he makes in the present. Ritchson worked on this internal dimension separately from his physical training. He read veterans' memoirs and spoke with psychologists treating PTSD in military personnel. He wanted to understand not just what this kind of pain looks like, but how it lives inside a person, how it affects their perception, their reactions, their choices. The result is visible in every scene where Ritchson exists without action. When the camera just watches him, when he stands and stares, when he talks to someone in the squad about something mundane, that second layer is always there. Something unspoken, yet deeply felt. For Hughes, working with Ritchson on War Machine was fundamentally different from his past experiences with action stars. On The Expendables, he worked with men who, over decades, had honed a precise understanding of their screen persona and operated within it. Ritchson, however, was at a different point in his professional journey. He was ready to take risks, to show weakness, doubt, and vulnerability. This made him an exceptionally valuable partner for a director building a multi-layered story on set. According to his colleagues, Ritchson asked a lot of questions, not about the technical aspects of the shoot, but about motivation, what exactly his character was thinking at a specific moment, what drove a certain decision. This is the hallmark of an actor who treats his profession as intellectual work, not just physical labor. An interesting detail that few people know: in several scenes in War Machine, the director intentionally kept improvised moments that Ritchson offered right during the take. These were small details, gestures, pauses, short lines that weren't in the script, but which Hughes chose to keep because they added something unwritten, yet undeniably true to the character today. Ritchson is at a point in his career where he has choices. After Reacher and War Machine, he has achieved a status that opens any door. And the fact that he chose this project, that he didn't retreat to a safer more guaranteed commercial avenue speaks volumes about him as a professional who cares not just about being on screen, but about saying something significant. The filming location is not just a set. It is a character, especially in a film where the environment carries thematic weight, where an open landscape means vulnerability and the horizon means a threat. Patrick Hughes understood this from the very beginning of War Machine's development, which is why choosing the locations was just as critical a decision as casting his actors. 2 locations: the state of Victoria in Australia and Queenstown in New Zealand. At first glance, this might seem like a strange choice for a movie that begins in Afghanistan. But the moment you look at the specific landscapes of these regions, the logic becomes absolutely clear. The state of Victoria is located in southeastern Australia. When most people think of this state, they picture Melbourne, one of the most civilized and cultural cities in the southern hemisphere. But outside the urban sprawl, Victoria offers something completely different. The arid pastures of the state's north, rocky ridges, open expanses with sun-scorched vegetation. These are landscapes that, given the right light and angles, look exactly like an Afghan province. No studio walls, no green screen, real earth underfoot, real sky overhead. For cinematographer Aaron Morton, this was an ideal working environment. Morton is a New Zealand DP with a rich background in genre film and television. He knows how to work with natural light so that a landscape becomes an emotional tool, not just a backdrop. In Victoria, he found what he was looking for. The light there is distinct. The Australian sun cuts differently than European or American sun. It has a harshness that perfectly matched the tone of the film's first act. The production crew spent several weeks in Victoria shooting all the Afghanistan-related scenes. It was grueling work, filming outdoors during the Australian summer. And September in Australia is early spring bleeding into summer demands, specific logistics, heat, dust, unpredictable winds. The actors worked in full tactical gear, which is a genuine physical trial in such conditions. Ritchson, according to crew members, never complained. He viewed physical discomfort as part of the job, something that made his on-screen presence more authentic. When a soldier on screen looks exhausted, when the sweat on his face is real and not applied by a makeup artist, the audience feels it instinctively, even without realizing why. An interesting technical detail for certain scenes. The team took a unique approach to dust and dirt. Instead of using standard cinematic smoke effects, Morton insisted that moving vehicles and actors kick up real dust from the real ground. This added an organic texture to the frame that is impossible to synthesize. Dust moves differently than smoke. It settles differently. It interacts with light differently. And all of this influences how the viewer processes the reality of the scene. Then, the crew relocated to Queenstown. Queenstown is a tourist hub on New Zealand's South Island, a town sitting at the foot of a mountain range, surrounded by lakes and rocky peaks. Most people know it as the extreme sports capital of the world, a place people go for bungee jumping and skiing. But filmmakers know Queenstown for a different reason. It is one of the most photogenic spots on Earth, a place where nature has built sets that no human could design. Peter Jackson shot parts of The Lord of the Rings here. His mountain vistas served as myth. Hughes used them differently. Where Jackson saw epic beauty, Hughes saw a threat. The mountain landscapes of Queenstown in War Machine carry a sense of enclosure, a trap. Towering cliffs, narrow gorges, places with no quick exit. For the second and third acts of the film, when the situation turns critical, these landscapes operate exactly that way. Aaron Morton filmed in Queenstown primarily during early mornings and late evenings, when the light takes on a special quality. Golden hour in a mountainous region is truly unique. Long shadows, saturated colors, air that takes on an almost tangible density through a camera lens. Several scenes shot at sunset in the outskirts of Queenstown became some of the film's most visually memorable moments. But working in Queenstown had its challenges. Mountainous terrain creates logistical nightmares. Moving equipment, transporting the crew between locations, setting up in places inaccessible by vehicles, all of this required meticulous planning. Several shooting days were delayed by weather. In the mountains, weather shifts rapidly, and what looked like a perfect shoot day in the morning could turn into impenetrable fog or torrential rain by noon. Hughes viewed these delays philosophically. Nature, he noted in an interview, is a co-writer you cannot fire. You can only learn to work with it, and some of the best shots in the film arose precisely from situations that initially seemed like problems. Unexpected fog rolling off the lake, light shifting in seconds due to a cloud front. Morton was ready for these moments and knew how to catch them. The 3-month shoot from September 16th to December 14th, 2024 involve bouncing between both locations in varied sequences. This did not always match the film's chronological order. As is standard in film production, scenes were shot based on logistical and budgetary convenience, not the order they appear on screen. Editing pieced it all together. It is also worth noting that working in Australia and New Zealand held special personal significance for Hughes. This is his part of the world. It's where he started. It's where he shot Red Hill, his debut. Coming home after years of working in Europe and North America wasn't just a professional choice, but a personal one. And this personal dimension, this rootedness in a specific place, translates to how the camera views these landscapes, not like a postcard, but with the gaze of someone who knows the place and breathes its air. When a viewer watches a good movie, they don't think about the cinematography. They think about the story, the characters, the emotions. That is the highest compliment for a cinematographer. Aaron Morton did exactly this on War Machine. His work is integrated so organically into the narrative that the technical mastery becomes invisible. But if you stop and look closely at how he frames every shot, it becomes clear that immense effort lies behind this invisibility. Morton chose a visual language for War Machine that can be described as tactile realism. The camera exists at the level of the human body. It doesn't float above events, handing the viewer the godlike perspective of an omniscient observer. It stays right next to the characters, breathing their air, feeling their exhaustion. This is a fundamental decision for a film where the central theme is human vulnerability. Against a force it cannot comprehend, the camera work in the military. Scenes of the first act is deliberately styled in a documentary tradition. Slight instability in the frame, rapid focus pulls, the sensation that the operator is reacting to what is happening rather than controlling it. This creates a sense of immersion that is hard to achieve with perfectly calibrated tracking shots or crane moves. Morton utilized handheld cameras for most of the first act, a decision made jointly with Hughes during pre-production. When the genre shift happens, when something beyond real military experience emerges, the visual language changes. It's barely noticeable, but it is there. The camera begins to move a bit more smoothly. The framing becomes slightly more deliberate, the horizon slightly more symmetrical. This is no accident, nor is it a break in style. It is a conscious technique, a cue to the audience that the rules of this world have shifted. that normal logic no longer applies. When the character's world moves past normality, the camera reflects it. The 2.39:1 aspect ratio wasn't chosen out of mere tradition. It is a widescreen format that makes the horizon a part of every frame. In a film about soldiers operating in wide-open terrain, the horizon isn't just a geographic border. It is a psychological border, a line beyond which the unknown begins. Morton constantly uses this negative. Space on the edges of the frame, the vast emptiness on either side of the characters too, remind us just how alone they are in this massive expanse. Now for the visual effects. War Machine tackled a problem faced by any sci-fi film working with a budget constrained compared to massive Hollywood blockbusters. How to create a convincing alien presence without spending hundreds of millions of dollars on CG. The answer the team found lies in a principle that smart directors have used for decades: show less, imply more. The most effective moments regarding the alien threat in War Machine are not the ones where it is shown in full detail. They are the ones where the viewer sees its aftermath, the characters' reactions, glimpses caught on the edge of the frame, in reflections, in shadows. This is directorial wisdom rooted in Steven Spielberg's Jaws and Ridley Scott's Alien. The audience's imagination will always conjure something far more terrifying than any computer-generated asset. That said, the War Machine VFX team did significant work on the moments when the alien threat actually enters the frame. The guiding principle here was to avoid anything overly familiar. No anthropomorphic shapes, no glowing orbs or flying saucers. The visual design was born from tight collaboration between Hughes, the production designer, and the CGI team. The mandate was, create something the viewer instantly recognizes as a threat, but cannot fully classify. Something that defies existing categories. Practical onset effects were used wherever possible, specifically because they give the actors something real to react to. Explosions, shockwaves, atmospheric disruptions, all of this was physically created on location, not added in post. Ritchson and his co-stars reacting to a real explosion is fundamentally different from them reacting to a director yelling boom on a quiet soundstage. The body reacts differently. Pupils dilate differently. Muscles tense differently. All of this is caught by the lens and survives in the final cut. The stunt coordination on War Machine was handled by a team with serious experience in Australian film and TV. Much like he does on Reacher, performed a vast majority of his own stunts. This is a matter of principle for him. He believes an action actor should be present in a scene with more than just their face. When the audience sees a body in the frame, it should be the actor's body, not a double's. It is a matter of honesty with the audience. Several combat sequences were staged as long, continuous takes. This means the camera rolls without cuts for several minutes while the actors move through complex fight choreography. This demands countless rehearsals and exceptional physical stamina. A mistake in the middle of a long take means starting from the top. Ritchson and his scene partners rehearsed these moments dozens of times before the cameras ever rolled. The on-set sound mixing also deserves its own mention, even though we will cover the final sound design later. The sound mixer ensured that live, practical audio was captured with maximum fidelity. Footsteps on specific gravel, heavy breathing under exertion, the rustle of tactical gear in motion. All of these details made it into the film's final mix, giving it an organic audio texture that cannot be synthesized in a booth. The film's editing was entrusted to a professional, with a strong background in genre cinema. The pacing of War Machine is an achievement in its own right. The first act breathes slowly and methodically, giving the audience time to settle into the film's world. The second act slowly tightens the coil. The third act releases it violently and without warning. It is a classic three-act structure, but executed with a precision not often found in every genre movie. Dolby Atmos, the film's final audio format, imposed special demands on the editing process. Dolby Atmos space is sound can exist anywhere around the view above, below, behind, on the sides. This meant editing decisions had to account for how every cut would be felt acoustically, not just visually. Several scene transitions use sound as an early cue, where the viewer hears the next shot before seeing it. This creates a specific rhythm of perception that functions on a level completely inaccessible to standard viewing setups without a quality sound system. There are movies where the music decorates the action, and there are movies where the music is an active participant in the narrative, where it doesn't comment on events, but acts alongside the cast and camera. War Machine belongs to the latter. Dmitry Golovko, who composed the score, created a track that operates exactly like this. Not as a backdrop. As a voice, Golovko is not a household name for mass audiences, but within the professional community, he is respected for a very specific skill. He hears the film. He doesn't just watch it and churn out mood-appropriate music. He truly hears its internal rhythm, its breath, the moments where silence speaks louder than sound, and the moments where sound must articulate what the image cannot. His approach to the War Machine score was outlined right at the start of his collaboration with Hughes. The director framed the task like this: the music must reflect the internal state of the protagonist, not external events. When something terrifying is happening on screen, the score shouldn't tell the audience to be scared. It should tell them what Soldier 81 is feeling in that exact moment. And those are two very different things. Golovko anchored the score in a mix of live, orchestral elements and electronic textures. This is not a novel concept in itself. Composers like Johan Johansson in his work with Denis Villeneuve or Ben Salisbury, and Jeff Barrell collaborating with Alex Garland, have pioneered a whole movement. In modern cinema, where the line between orchestra and synthesizer is intentionally blurred, Golovko operates within this tradition but brings his own distinct sensibility to it. In the first act, there is almost no music. This is deliberate. The military sequences in Victoria sound exactly like reality: wind, gravel under boots, radio chatter, the breathing of soldiers. The silence serves as context, as the baseline from which any deviation will feel infinitely sharper. The first true musical cue sneaks in right, as the situation begins to shift, and Golovko makes it quiet, not loud. It is a low-frequency pulse, barely perceptible, right on the edge of hearing. The viewer might not even realize music is playing, but something inside them already reacts to the shifting atmosphere. The body hears frequencies the conscious mind hasn't registered yet. It is a physiological effect, and Golovko uses it intentionally. As the tension in the film mounts, the musical fabric grows denser. Strings join the low-frequency pulse first, as isolated notes, then as swelling waves. There are moments in the middle of the film where the score reaches such a density and pressure that it is physically felt in your chest. This is not a cheap trick. It is precise calculation. What truly deserves attention is how Golovko handles silence following these climactic musical spikes. After a violent crescendo, He does not grant the audience a smooth decrescendo. The music cuts out hard, and in that silence, the viewer is left entirely alone with what they just witnessed. It is a very brutal technique, in the best sense of the word. It refuses to let you distance yourself from the event. It demands that you stay in it. For a few key sequences, Golovko wrote themes that stand as independent musical statements. Soldier 81's theme, which could be considered the main theme, is built on a very simple melodic framework. A few notes, looping with slight variations. This too is intentional. A person carrying trauma does not live inside complex melodic structures. They loop back to the same thoughts, the same images. The simplicity of the theme mirrors this psychological reality. Now, regarding how Dolby Atmos altered the entire audio experience, Dolby Atmos is a spatial audio format that allows sound objects to be placed precisely in 3D space around the viewer. This is fundamentally different from traditional surround sound, where audio is tied to fixed channels. In Dolby Atmos, sound can travel. It can hover above the audience, sweep across the room, vanish behind them, and return to the front. For War Machine, this meant that the sound designers and Golovko worked in incredibly tight lockstep from the dawn of post-production. The musical cues and sound effects were not two separate tracks slapped on top of each other. They were integrated elements of a unified three-dimensional audio space that was directed just as meticulously as the visuals. A concrete example, in one scene, as the threat approaches from a specific direction, Golovko panned the musical stems within the Dolby Atmos, mixed so that the score physically travels in the same direction as the threat. A viewer in an equipped theater actually hears the dread approaching from their flank. This creates an atmosphere of inevitability that standard stereo simply cannot produce. It should be noted that watching War Machine through headphones or standard TV speakers dilutes some of this effect. The film only fully unleashes itself in an Atmos-equipped theater or at home with a proper sound system. Netflix supports Dolby Atmos streams on compatible devices, which was one of the technical reasons partnering with Netflix was highly advantageous. Special praise must be given to the sound mix during the quieter scenes. In action movies, quiet moments often sound dead, serving only as a waiting room for the next explosion. War Machine avoids this. Even its stillest moments are flush with sonic life that holds your attention. The ambient hum of a specific location, the breathing of the cast, the faintest musical texture, nothing is empty. Every second of the film's audio landscape is packed with purpose. Golovko also deliberately sidestepped genre clichés. War films often lean on snare drums to signify power and marching. Sci-fi films often retreat into cold electronic minimalism to scream alien. War Machine does both, but refuses to surrender to their tropes. Drums appear, but not as a march. Synths appear, but not as a distant, clinical hum. Everything is blended, melted down, and subjected to a single, overriding emotional logic. Discussing a movie's plot is always a delicate task. On one hand, a reader who hasn't seen it needs enough context to know what it is about. On the other, a story deserves to be experienced firsthand, without every twist telegraphed in advance. Here, we will try to strike the perfect balance. We will discuss structure and meaning without devolving into a simple summary. War Machine starts where many war films of the past 2 decades start, Afghanistan. But in the opening minutes, it is clear that Hughes and Beaufort are utilizing this setting differently than the norm. This is not a political film about the justification of Western military presence in the region. This is not a recreation of a specific historical battle. Afghanistan, here, is a location that already carries heavy emotional baggage for any 21st century viewer. It is a place synonymous with exhaustion, with the impossibility of victory in a war lacking clear boundaries. This makes the choice of setting brilliant. When something entirely unprecedented, something with no historical parallel or tactical handbooker, arrives in such a place, the disorientation is magnified. Men who are already operating at the absolute limit of their endurance suddenly find out that their limits are completely useless. Soldier 81 enters the frame already burdened. This is vital. Hughes does not show us a happy, carefree man and then strip him of his joy. We meet him after something has already broken. What exactly happened is fed to the audience in droplets, through details, fragmented flashbacks, and the way he interacts with his peers. This structure demands active participation from the viewer. You have to assemble the man piece by piece, and this hooks you much harder than heavy-handed exposition. The protagonist's squad gets an assignment, a standard operation in hostile terrain. The kind of mission these men have run dozens of times. Everyone knows their job. Everyone knows the contingencies. The teamwork is polished to a lethal shine, and it is exactly this polish, this supreme professional confidence of the first act, that makes the subsequent dismantling of the squad so jarring. Dennis, Quaid's commander, appears in several key scenes early on, and every frame he occupies drips with context. Through him, the audience absorbs the hierarchy, understands where Soldier 81 fits into the machine, and intuits their shared history. Quaid doesn't deliver sprawling monologues. He speaks sharply and concisely, and every line carries a backstory he refuses to tell aloud. Stephan James brings a unique energy to the group. His character asks the questions the others swallow, not out of cowardice or inexperience, but because he processes the world from a slightly skewed angle. In the military, these guys are often viewed as a nuisance, dragging the pace with overthinking. Yet, inevitably, their questions turn out to be the ones that mattered most. And now, the sharpest edge of the first act, something changes in the sky. Not suddenly, and not with the bombastic CGI fireworks of a massive studio tentpole. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, a shift in atmospheric pressure. The horizon changes color. A sound that fits into zero categories of anything these men have heard in years of combat. And their first reaction, deeply human and deeply professional at the same time, is not panic. It is the attempt to classify, to find the right box, to understand what they are looking at. There is no box. The transition from the first act to the second was engineered by Hughes with tremendous care. He didn't want the arrival of the alien threat to feel like an entirely different movie, was stitched into the middle of a war drama. He wanted it to feel like an escalation of the same story, just with infinitely higher stakes. And for that to work, the audience had to know and love these men before everything went sideways. The second act hinges on the fundamental collision of experience versus the unknown. A professional soldier's entire existence is built on systems, protocols, algorithmic responses to varied stimuli. These systems work because they are built on understanding the enemy, knowing their capabilities, their weaknesses, their logic. Strip that knowledge away, drop a professional in front of something that breaks every algorithm, and see what is left. What is left is the human. This is where War Machine plants its flag. When the system fails, the only remaining tool is the human being with all their complexity. their irrationality, their terrors, and their profound capacity for compassion. And paradoxically, this becomes not a liability, but their greatest strength. The interplay between the characters in the second act mutates. When the external threat refuses to obey the rules, the group's internal friction boils over. The tension that was previously suppressed by professional discipline begins to fracture. Disagreements explode. Suppressed doubts are shouted. Jai Courtney's character, whose instincts clash with doctrine, sparks a conflict that in a normal op would result in disciplinary action. Here, it becomes an existential debate. Who do you trust when nothing makes sense? Orders or your gut? Keanan Lonsdale carries what is best described as the audience surrogate role through this section. His character processes the horror the way a normal person in the theater would. His reactions are pure, unfiltered by decades of combat calluses. That makes his arc one of the most emotionally devastating in the film. The second act of War Machine concludes at absolute maximum pressure, when all avenues seem burned, all exits sealed, and every plan shattered. It is a classic structure, but it strikes home here precisely because the audience is deeply invested in these men. Not abstract action heroes, concrete individuals with names, ghosts, and bonds. The third act is the moment of truth for any movie. Everything established prior, every theme, every conflict must pay off. And not just pay off, it must feel earned. The audience needs to feel that the finale naturally grew out of the roots planted in Act 1, rather than being slapped on to look cool or make the theater cheer. War Machine makes a few pivotal choices in its third act, and those choices dictate how the film lingers in your memory. First of all, War Machine rejects the most seductive ending available to the genre. It rejects the triumph of humanity over the threat via technology, cunning, or discovering a magical weak point. That is the standard playbook for Predator, Independence Day, or War of the Worlds. Humanity finds a loophole. Humanity wins. Roll credits. Hughes and Beaufort took a different road. Survival in War Machine is not a victory. It is something far messier. The hero doesn't nuke the aliens. He doesn't decipher their grand plan. He doesn't locate the exhaust port that blows up the mothership. The finale is built around a choice, a moment where a man hits the absolute ceiling of his capabilities and simply chooses not to yield. Not because he has a master plan, but because refusing to quit is the only weapon he has left. This is a monumentally important narrative decision. It strips the finale of traditional blockbuster spectacle. There is no triumphant explosion erasing the threat. No shot of the battered hero smirking over a dead monster. But in exchange, you get something that stays with you long after the screen goes black. The realization that this movie was talking about something real, a genuine human condition, wrapped in a sci-fi shell. Soldier 81's arc climaxes in an action that feels paradoxical. A man trained his whole life to inflict violence makes a choice in the 11th hour that completely defies that conditioning. This decision costs him dearly. It isn't clean. It isn't what the manual would suggest, but it dictates the fate of the men beside him. Alan Ritchson operates on a level in these final scenes that validates everything discussed earlier. Utter physical minimalism, masking terrifying internal intensity. There is a brief scene in the third act, entirely devoid of dialogue, where the camera just sits on his face for a few seconds. In those few seconds, you absorb more about this man than from all the exposition combined. It is top-tier acting. Stephan James's character reaches a climax that perfectly pays off his entire trajectory. The guy who kept asking questions, the guy who functioned as the squad's conscience, is shoved into his own crucible. How James navigates this scene balancing sheer terror, fierce resolve, and profound intimacy makes for one of the most gripping, emotional beats of the entire runtime. Dennis. Quaid re-enters the narrative in a context that recontextualizes his entire earlier performance. What looked like standard commanding authority gains an entirely new dimension. Hughes's favorite trick strikes again. What looks simple on the surface reveals deep complexity under a microscope. The final 20 minutes of War Machine is cinema as a physical assault. The Dolby Atmos mix is red. The 3D audio space is saturated with sounds that defy categorization. Golovko's score hits critical mass. Morton's camera, which largely kept a respectful distance earlier, aggressively tightens its framing. The editing goes into overdrive, and then silence. Not a final explosion. Not a swelling orchestral victory lap. Pure silence, where the viewer is left stranded with what just occurred. This was a polarizing directorial choice. Some audiences saw it as incomplete, an open-ended cliffhanger leaving too many questions hanging. Others read it exactly as intended, a space left for interpretation, a sign of respect for the audience's intelligence. Critics who praised the film unanimously pointed to the finale as its crown jewel. The ones who disliked it pointed to the exact same ending as the source of their frustration. For an auteur with a vision, this is the perfect outcome. If an ending sparks heated debate, it isn't sterile. It means it struck a nerve. It is also worth mentioning the fate of the supporting cast in the third act. Hughes does not spare his ensemble. This is a crucial choice. In most Hollywood action films, there is an unwritten contract. The lead survives. A few key friends survive, and the losses are predictably distributed. War Machine burns that contract, and every time someone falls, it hurts. Simply because Hughes took the time to make you care. The final frame of the movie is an image that sticks. Morton shoots it in the same ultra-wide perspective used throughout, with the horizon dominating the edges. But the meaning of that horizon has fundamentally mutated. In the first act, the horizon was the border of the known world, beyond which lay danger. In the final shot, the hero looks at the horizon differently, not like a soldier scanning for threats, but like a man who survived an ordeal that shattered his understanding of what it means to be alive. It is in this final image, in this gaze upon the horizon, that War Machine delivers its thesis, not with words, not with exposition, but with an image the viewer must interpret for themselves, yet is impossible not to feel. A good genre movie entertains. A great genre movie does something more. It uses the skin of the genre, its tropes, its expectations to talk about things that would require a completely different vocabulary in any other format. War Machine is not a masterpiece in the vein of Apocalypse Now or The Thin Red Line, but it is an honest film, and buried within that honesty is a thematic depth far richer than its explosive poster suggests. Let's start with the most obvious and critical theme: loss, grief. Everything in War Machine is dripping with it. Soldier 81 is a man we meet after something in his life has been irrevocably shattered. The movie deliberately refuses to spell out the details of this trauma immediately. It is pieced together slowly, through tics, through behavioral cues, through how he handles specific stress. This is not just a narrative gimmick. It is razor-sharp, psychological observation. That is exactly how grief manifests in reality, not as a single, tearful monologue, but as a baseline state of being that flares up when least expected. Hughes researched military PTSD extensively and laced the protagonist's character with traits that trauma specialists recognize instantly: hypervigilance, tightly controlled reactions requiring massive internal exertion, trust issues, the emotional moat he builds around himself, even with his brothers in. None of this is spoon-fed to the audience. It just exists in Ritchson's performance. And viewers who have lived through this, or know those who have, will see far more in these details than the average viewer. The second major theme is brotherhood. In a military context, brotherhood isn't a buzzword from a recruitment poster. It is a tangible psychological reality forged between people who survive extreme trauma together. A trust that doesn't need to be spoken. A willingness to throw your life away for the guy next to you, not out of blind idealism, but from the bone-deep knowledge that he would do the exact same for you. War Machine shows this brotherhood without grand speeches. It shows it through how one man looks at another when things go to hell. A gesture that requires zero translation. Knowing when to shut up and when to speak. The ensemble cast that Hughes so meticulously built validates its worth right here. When you have a real squad on screen, that brotherhood radiates without a single line of dialogue. But the film is also brutally honest about the dark side of this bond. About how it creates a dependency that becomes radioactive once a soldier leaves the service. A person conditioned to a world where their life relies entirely on the men beside them, and theirs on him struggles to adapt to a civilian world where that interdependence vanishes. This is a primary source of veteran suffering, and War Machine touches on it with immense care. The third, and perhaps most complex theme, is the individual versus the system. The film's title carries a dual meaning. War Machine literally refers to the alien threat, but it is also a well-worn term for the military-industrial complex itself. The army as an institution, a machine designed to strip people of their humanity, assign them numbers, program them with protocols, and demand blind execution. Soldier 81 is a ghost haunting this machine. A massive part of his character arc is realizing what makes him human in spite of this system. It isn't his lethality. It's his ability to break protocol when protocol ceases to serve a human purpose. This is a politically delicate tightrope. Hughes wasn't making a traditional anti-war movie. He isn't condemning soldiers, nor is he blindly romanticizing them. He is asking a sharper question. How does a system built by humans to protect humans mutate into something that crushes the human spirit? And how does a man trapped inside that machine preserve his soul? The alien threat operates as a radical catalyst here. It doesn't just present a physical danger. It actively short-circuits the system, because the system has no protocol for it. And when the machine breaks down, everything it was suppressing bubbles to the surface. Every human trait the military deems inefficient: doubt, empathy, irrational attachments, the urge to break formation to save a friend. The symbolism of names versus numbers is deliberate. Soldier 81 is a designation. The film withholds his actual name for a very long time, and when it is finally spoken, it hits with profound symbolic weight. Reclaiming his name is reclaiming his humanity. It is the transition from function back to flesh and blood. The color grading also carries thematic weight. Morton's cinematography is built on contrast. The first act is bathed in warm, scorched earth tones, the colors of a known, albeit harsh, reality. Once the threat lands, the palette shifts. icy blues and dead greys slowly suffocate the warmth. The lighting goes cold. It is the visual language of alienation, of having the ground ripped out from under your feet. Special mention must go to the theme of isolation. War Machine is, at its core, a story about the profound loneliness of the career soldier. Not physical isolation, he is always surrounded by his squad. Existential isolation. The trauma he carries is entirely untranslatable to anyone who hasn't worn the uniform. Even surrounded by his brothers, he is locked inside his own head, and bizarrely, the alien invasion is what finally shatters that isolation. Confronted with the utterly incomprehensible, everyone is instantly rendered equal in their helplessness. The chasm between the veteran and the rookie, between the hardened killer and the terrified kid, vanishes. It is a great equalizer that forces a completely new, raw connection between the men. Hughes never screams any of these themes out loud. They aren't pontificated upon in heavy-handed monologues. They live in the negative space between words, in the visuals, in Golovko's agonizing score, and in Ritchson's loaded silences. This is why the film rewards multiple viewings. On the first pass, you watch the plot. On the second, you watch what the plot is trying to say. No film exists in a vacuum. Every movie carries the DNA of dozens of ancestors' conscious nods, unconscious influences, and genre conventions that a director either leans into or violently rejects, but can never ignore. War Machine is a fascinating case study in this regard. It knows exactly what its pedigree is and plays with it brilliantly. It doesn't blindly copy, nor does it arrogantly dismiss. It engages in a conversation. Let's start with the most glaring ancestor, John McTiernan's Predator. 1987 is arguably the most direct genre blueprint for War Machine. The skeletal similarities are undeniable. A squad of elite bad, a jungle swap for Afghan mountains, an enemy they cannot comprehend or kill conventionally. The squad gets picked off. A final, primal one-on-one showdown. That is the shared backbone. But what Hughes does with that spine is entirely different from McTiernan. Predator is a celebration of mass. Literally, Schwarzenegger, Weathers. Ventura, the cast exudes such overwhelming physical excess that it operates as a visual metaphor for American hegemony in the late 80s. The final victory is achieved through physical ingenuity, weaponizing the environment, brains beating brawn through cunning. War Machine does not believe in that kind of victory. It isn't interested in the fist-pumping triumph. It is interested in the psychological devastation before and after. The mental battlefield, not the physical victory lap. The second core ancestor is War of the Worlds. Not Spielberg's 2005 blockbuster, though that plays a part, but H.G. Wells's 1898 novel, specifically the paralyzing helplessness it evokes. In Wells's story, humanity does not defeat the Martians with valor or military genius. The threat is neutralized by biology, completely independent of human agency. It is a radically bleak take on humanity facing the unknown. Hughes clearly absorbed Wells, or at least the primary lesson of Wells. An unknowable threat isn't just dangerous physically. It is dangerous psychologically because it shatters humanity's illusion of control. It breaks the belief that every problem has a solution, that sheer willpower and firepower can conquer anything. The threat in War Machine operates identically. It doesn't just kill bodies, it kills belief systems. A third ancestor, rarely discussed but obviously present in War Machine's DNA, is Paul W. S. Anderson's 1998 film Soldier, starring Kurt Russell, That movie bombed at the box office and was unfairly forgotten. But it asked the exact question War Machine brings back. What happens to a lifelong soldier when the machine that built him throws him away? When his lethal skill set becomes obsolete? Russell played a biological weapon trying to remember how to be human. Ritchson walks that exact same path in War Machine, just under different circumstances and with a much heavier psychological payload. We must also mention 2012's Battleship. Not because War Machine is similar, but because it is the exact opposite. Battleship is the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when military versus aliens relies purely on empty CGI spectacle, devoid of character, investment, or thematic weight. Its critical and commercial implosion was a wake-up call to the industry. War Machine can be viewed as the antidote to Battleship, proof that this hybrid genre absolutely works, provided you focus on the humans holding the guns, not the lasers they're shooting at. Looking at more recent influences, Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim 2013 deserves a nod. That film did something vital for the genre. It re-injected humanity via the emotional synchronization of its pilots. The idea that the people operating the military hardware are not just trigger pullers, but deeply scarred humans relying on interpersonal connection, that is an idea War Machine runs with. Albeit replacing giant mechs with boots-on-the-ground realism. Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line, 1998, haunts the edges of War Machine, not visually, but spiritually. Malick viewed war as a space where men are violently forced to confront their own existence, wrestling with questions peacetime allows us to ignore. Hughes operates differently. No whispering voiceovers, no dreamlike pacing, but the core question echoes. What does it mean to be a human being in an environment where humanity gets you killed? And of course, the Amazon show that made Ritchson a superstar is paradoxically part of War Machine's DNA, not because they share a genre, but because Reacher hardwired a very specific set of expectations into the audience regarding Alan Ritchson. Viewers click play expecting a certain kind of unstoppable force. Hughes weaponizes that expectation. He gives the audience the physical behemoth they crave, and then emotionally guts him. Finally, it is worth pointing out what War Machine consciously ignores from the genre playbook. There is zero comedic relief. From Predator to The Martian, humor is the standard release valve for audience tension. It lets you exhale before the next scare. War Machine refuses to let you exhale. Hughes keeps his foot on the throat, forcing the audience to sit in the suffocating discomfort. It is an aggressive choice that might alienate casual viewers, but perfectly aligns with the grim reality of the story. There are also no sappy flashbacks to the wife and kids back home. In standard war movies, these serve as lazy shorthand for what we are fighting for. Hughes correctly deduced that modern audiences see right through that manipulation. Instead, the characters' tether to their humanity is expressed entirely through their bonds with the men standing next to them in the mud. Ultimately, War Machine occupies a very specific corner of the genre map. It is not the muscle-flexing triumph of Predator, not the passive doom of War of the Worlds, not the hollow noise of Battleship. It is intimate, psychologically savage, and laser-focused. A military sci-fi movie where military matters infinitely more than sci-fi. When a movie drops on Netflix, the traditional metrics of success go out the window. Box office grosses, the ultimate arbiter of success or failure for a century, are either non-existent or so minuscule they offer zero insight. Netflix plays a different game. They measure hours viewed, weekly top 10 rankings, and global penetration. And by every one of these metrics, War Machine posted numbers that made the industry stop and stare. Let's start with the critical reception. A 69% on Rotten Tomatoes from professional critics is a score that, in the realm of genre cinema, translates to solid approval. It is not a disaster. A disaster is anything sub 40%. It is not a cultural masterpiece. It is an honest assessment of a well-crafted genre flick that doesn't pretend to be high art, but absolutely delivers on its promises. A score of 54 on Metacritic tells a slightly different story. Metacritic uses a weighted average, and hovering around 50 usually signifies mixed or average reviews. The gap between Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic here is simply mechanical. RT measures the percentage of positive reviews, while Metacritic averages the actual grades. A film that the majority of critics rate as a solid 6/10 gets a high RT score and an average Metacritic score. That is exactly what happened here. What did the critics actually write? Those who praised it singled out a few key elements. First, Alan Ritchson's performance. Nearly every positive review cited this as one of his best works to date. Critics highlighted the fusion of sheer physical intimidation and deep psychological scarring, a combo rarely nailed in action movies. Several outlets explicitly noted that Ritchson carries the film on his back during its weaker script moments. Second, Patrick Hughes' direction. Professional critics recognize craft, and many noted that Hughes had delivered his most mature picture yet. The Bodyguard movies were popcorn fun. War Machine was an attempt to actually say something. Not every reviewer bought into the attempt, but they respected that he took the swing. Third, Aaron Morton's cinematography. When a cinematographer gets specifically shouted out in reviews for a sci-fi actioner, you know they did something right. On the negative side, the primary target was the script, or rather, specific narrative choices that some felt were undercooked. Several critics argued that the protagonist's tragic backstory was hinted at but never fully excavated, that the movie tiptoes to the edge of profound psychological territory and then retreats into the safety of explosions. This is a fair critique. War Machine definitely walks a tightrope between the emotional depth it aspires to and the relentless pacing an action movie demands. It is a compromise Hughes made willingly, and half the critics accepted it, while the other half, DIDN, single quotes, the audience scores 66% on Rotten Tomatoes, perfectly mirrors the critics. This is rare. Usually, there is a massive chasm between the two. Critics hunt for artistic ambition. Audiences hunt for entertainment. When the two scores align, it usually means the movie is remarkably honest. It doesn't pretend to be smarter than it is, and it doesn't insult anyone's intelligence. User reviews across various platforms revealed an interesting trend. Viewers who went in with moderate expectations were genuinely blown away. Viewers expecting a $200 million summer blockbuster extravaganza were let down. This perfectly summarizes the movie's DNA. War Machine is not a spectacle. It is a story. If you approach it on those terms, it fires on all cylinders. Now, for the Netflix date, and this is where things get truly compelling. On March 6, 2026, War Machine dropped. Within its first week, it secured the title of the second biggest debut of the year on the platform, meaning only one other movie released that entire year had generated more viewing hours in its first 7 days. Netflix is notoriously cagey about releasing hard viewership numbers, but their weekly top 10 lists painted an undeniable picture. War Machine debuted at number 1 in several major markets, including Australia and New Zealand, where the movie benefited from domestic pride regarding the crew and locations. It also instantly broke into the top 3 in the United States and across Europe. What does this mean for Netflix's strategy? It means rescuing the movie from Lionsgate was the exact audience that might have skipped buying a $15 movie ticket on a Tuesday found the movie instantly on their homepage on a Friday night. The algorithm did exactly what it was built to do. It shoved the movie directly into the feeds of everyone who binged Reach, watched War Docs, and loved gritty C-fi. Alan Ritchson was the ultimate Trojan horse here. His Reacher fanbase is one of the most rabid and engaged demographics in modern streaming. They track his projects, blast them on social media, and show up in droves. War Machine rode that organic marketing wave all the way to the top. Shortly after the movie hit, rumors began swirling that Hughes and Ritchson were already mapping out a sequel, unofficially dubbed War Machines. That alone is the ultimate proof of success. Streaming services do not greenlight sequels out of the goodness of their hearts. If sequel talk goes public, it means the internal data justified the investment. C-Fiction magazine called it a competent actioner that wisely avoids biting off more than it can chew. Some might take that as a backhanded compliment, but in the realm of genre cinema, it is high praise. A movie that sets a goal, achieves it, and gets out before wearing out its welcome is a rarity in a market flooded with bloated content. The Australian theatrical run, despite its meager financial return, was vital for establishing the film's prestige before hitting streaming. Local press celebrated it as a domestic victory, framing it as Aussie talent dominating a global stage. This built an aura of legitimacy that a straight-to-streaming drop rarely achieves. Ultimately, the reception of War Machine perfectly illustrates the shifting paradigm of modern Hollywood success. $57,000 at the box office. The second biggest streaming debut of the year. These two facts do not contradict each other. They just describe different realities. It is a movie that successfully bypassed the dying theatrical model to find its exact audience exactly where they live. One of the most frequent complaints leveled against war movies is simple. That's not how it works. People who have actually served, who have real combat experience, often watch Hollywood military films with grinding teeth. Wrong gear, wrong hand signals, wrong psychology, the wrong way to hold a rifle, breach a door, or talk to an officer. War movies are largely made by civilians, for civilians, and it shows instantly to anyone who isn't one. Patrick Hughes desperately wanted to avoid that trap, and judging by the response especially from veterans leaving comments on forums and review sites, he largely pulled it off. Not because War Machine is a hyper-accurate documentary, but because it nails the psychological truth, and that matters infinitely more than getting a uniform patch exactly right. The bedrock of the film's military reality is the 75th Ranger Regiment of the U.S. Army. This is one of the most elite special operations forces in the American military, with a bloody, storied history stretching from World War II through Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Their motto is Rangers Lead the Way. That isn't just a bumper sticker. It is the tactical doctrine of a unit deployed to the most vicious environments. First. The pipeline to get into the 75th is called RASP, Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. It is essentially a meat grinder. The first phase lasts 8 days and is designed purely to shatter anyone lacking the physical and psychological titanium required for the job. Sleep is basically a rumor. The physical demands push human biology to its absolute breaking point. At least half the candidates ring the bell and quit. Often many more. The second phase is for weeks of grinding tactical, technical, and leadership evaluation. The men who survive both phases are forged into one of the tightest-knit fraternities on the planet. It is a brotherhood born of mutual suffering. Guys who survive rasp together know exactly what the man next to them is made of, because they watched him prove it when faking it was mathematically impossible. This is the exact psychological framework of the squad in War Machine. When you see the team operating like a single, lethal organism, moving without talking, shifting seamlessly because one guy changed his angle, that isn't a Hollywood choreographer showing off. That is the reality of Tier 1 operators. Hughes absorbed this during his research and injected it straight into the cast's veins. For the actors, this meant grueling, practical training. Before cameras rolled, the core cast was subjected to an intense physical and tactical boot camp run by actual Special Forces veterans. The goal wasn't to turn actors into actual Rangers. You can't do that in a month. The goal was to teach them how to exist in the same space. To teach their bodies how to maintain spacing, how to sweep a room as a cohesive unit, and how to subconsciously track their bodies' movements. The military advisors on set weren't just uniform inspectors. They brought real combat deployments to the table, and what they gave Hughes and the cast was something much deeper than tactical advice. They taught them the language of silence. Military culture relies heavily on nonverbal communication nods, stares, micro-adjustments that scream volumes to the initiated. When that level of unspoken communication bleeds onto the screen, even civilians can feel the difference between authentic operators and guys playing dress-up. The Afghan setting was also treated with grim respect. Hughes and Beaufort studied real operations in the Afghan mountains from 2001 to 2021, not to copy a specific battle, but to understand the soul-crushing reality of that specific theater, the sheer altitude that destroys your lungs, the nightmare of navigating terrain where every ridge looks identical, the psychological rot of running endless loops of operations with no discernible finish line. That last point, the sensation of fighting a war that cannot be won, where there is no specific objective that triggers the mission accomplished. Banner's arguably the most corrosive psychological element of the Afghan war. Men deployed over and over, leaving pieces of their sanity behind on every tour. It is a slow, grinding attrition of the soul, not a single cinematic, traumatic event. That is the exact psychological rot Hughes anchored into Soldier 81. Another major pillar of realism in the movie is its handling of death. Hollywood loves a dramatic death scene. Slow motion, swelling strings, a tragic final monologue about a girl back home. In reality, combat operators develop a brutal mechanism for compartmentalizing loss. Because if they didn't, everyone else would die too. A casualty is registered, boxed up in a dark corner of the brain, and the mission continues. You open that box later. Sometimes years later, War Machine nails this. When characters drop, there is no weeping pause. The squad steps over them and keeps moving because they have to. It looks incredibly cold. It is incredibly cold. But it is the absolute truth of combat psychology, and it elevates the film far beyond standard popcorn fare. Even the gear and weapon handling was heavily scrutinized. The advisors ensured that everything the actors carried and shot adhered to the strict SOP standard operating procedure of modern special ops. These are granular details 95% of the audience will miss. But the 5% who notice are exactly the people who become a movie's most vocal champions online, sparing the film from the ruthless internet mockery that sinks lazy military movies. Fusing this grounded military reality with an otherworldly alien threat creates a brilliant friction. The more you believe these guys are hardened elite killers, the more terrifying the aliens become. Because if these guys are getting butchered and panicking, what hope does anyone else have? That is the true terror engine of War Machine, not the CGI monster. The horrifying realization that the absolute best humanity has to offer is entirely powerless. And that is why the military authenticity wasn't just a neat detail, it was the load-bearing pillar of the entire movie. Every movie leaves a footprint. Sometimes it is visible immediately. Sometimes it takes years for people to realize that a specific film quietly shifted a genre, altered the culture, or permanently redirected the careers of everyone involved. War Machine is at the very beginning of its life cycle. It hit Netflix on March 6, 2026, which means the dust is barely settling. But even now, we can trace what it left behind, what it changed, and what will likely happen next. Let's start with the most concrete fallout: the sequel. Within weeks of War Machine dominating the Netflix charts, both Patrick Hughes and Alan Ritchson were openly discussing a follow-up. The working title of War Machines began circulating in interviews. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or cheap hype. In the streaming ecosystem, nobody officially teases a sequel unless the algorithmic gods have smiled upon the viewership data. The fact that the director and star are speaking freely means Netflix's internal metrics justified lighting the fuse on Part 2. What would a sequel look like? Hughes has been careful not to show his hand, but he has outlined a few ground rules. First, it won't be a lazy rehash of a new squad fighting a new monster. The world cracked open in War Machine has to expand. The stakes must escalate. The existential questions raised in the first film need to be pushed further, though not necessarily answered. Second, Ritchson remains the gravitational center. His character was fundamentally shattered and rebuilt in the first film. Whatever emerged from that wreckage is the engine for the next chapter. This is a remarkably mature approach. Not a cash-grab sequel, but a legitimate continuation of an arc. In an era where streaming platforms vomit out sequels purely based on spreadsheet algorithms rather than narrative necessity, this restraint commands respect. What does War Machine mean for Patrick Hughes' legacy? Before this, he was a highly respected hired gun, a wildly competent craftsman who could herd massive egos and deliver highly profitable, entertaining explosions. War Machine added an entirely new wing to his house. Now, Hughes is a director who can inject serious, bleak, thematic weight into a massive, commercially viable action template. That is an incredibly rare skill set. It is the kind of resume update that opens doors to massive franchise revivals and blank check passion projects. Hughes evolved from an indie Aussie darling Red Hill to a Hollywood ringmaster, The Expendables 3, and now to a genuine auteur operating within the blockbuster space. Film students study trajectories like this, not because they are flawless, but because they are proof of life. Proof that a director can survive the Hollywood studio grinder with their voice intact. And then there is Alan Ritchson. This is where the story gets truly cinematic. Ritchson grounded out in the trenches for nearly 2 decades before reaching the summit he currently occupies. 20 years of everything. Bit parts. Roles buried under latex. Projects that vanished into the ether a week after airing. Years of looking like the prototype of a movie star, yet watching the spotlight land on other people, and then Reacher. And now War Machine. What makes Ritchson an anomaly in the current Hollywood landscape? It boils down to a few things. First, he possesses a terrifying physical presence, coupled with genuine acting chops. In the action genre, convincing threat is a currency. An actor who makes the audience instantly believe he can murder a room full of people. Ritchson has that in spades. When he squares up, nobody questions the physics. It isn't wire work or it is sheer, undeniable mass. Second, he projects acute intelligence. Ritchson attacks a role cerebrally. You can see him thinking on screen. The way he listens, the way he calculates his environment. In a genre overflowing with meatheads who rely entirely on their biceps to convey emotion. This instantly separates him from the pack. Third, and this is what will dictate his legacy, he knows how to pick his battles. After the nuclear success of Reacher, he could have sleepwalked through a dozen Paint by Numbers action clones. Big guy shoots, bad guys, collects a check. If you do that too many times, the cement dries and you are trapped in that box forever. Ritchson chose War Machine precisely because it was dangerous. It demanded he strip away the invincible armor and show terror and grief. His position right now is bulletproof. He became an Alistair via streaming, meaning his fan base is ferociously loyal and platform agnostic. They don't care if he is in a theater or on their iPad. If his face is on the poster, they hit play. That kind of dedicated, localized gravity is priceless in a fragmented media landscape. Zooming out to the broader cultural context, War Machine arrived at a time when the conversation about military trauma, the invisible wounds of combat, and the horrifying reality of veteran reintegration is at a boiling point. Over 2 decades of grinding warfare in the Middle East have produced a generation of veterans whose psychological reality is a black box to the civilian population. Cinema remains one of the few crowbars capable of prying that box open. War Machine builds a bridge between those two worlds. Not perfectly. It still has to hit its commercial action beats. But it does it honestly and with profound respect for the subject matter. That alone validates its existence. Finally, looking at its impact on the Australian film industry, War Machine is a massive victory flag. Shot domestically, utilizing local crew and talent, yet dominating a global streaming platform. It proves that geography is no longer a handicap. A movie shot in the mud of Victoria can hold the #1 spot in Bangalore, Brazil, and Berlin simultaneously. That is the brutal lesson the modern film industry is currently learning. Not in boardrooms, but through raw data. And War Machine was one of the loudest examples of 20-6. In the end, what is this movie? It is the story of a man who collided with something completely outside the boundaries of his training, only to realize that the only weapon he had left was the one thing the military couldn't train out of him, his humanity, the ability to remain a person when the machine breaks down. It is a simple story, but simple stories, told well, are the hardest thing to achieve in cinema.